Assalamualaikum dan salam sejahtera. Anda bersama saya Nabilah Khaleeda dan ini Niaga AWANI. Seperti biasa pada jam ini kita akan berikan laporan berita bisnes kewangan ekonomi dalam dan juga luar negara dan kita mulakan dengan perkembangan terkini ini. Malaysia kini tersenarai antara negara yang akan dikenakan tarif import sebanyak 25% oleh Amerika Syarikat susulan pengumuman terbaru Presiden Donald Trump yang memperluas langkah perlindungan terhadap beberapa negara rakan dagang utama Washington. Dalam kenyataan rasmi yang dimuat naik ke platform Truth Social, Trump mengumumkan bahawa kadar tarif baru itu akan berkuat kuasa mulai 1 Ogos melibatkan barangan dari Malaysia, Jepun, Korea Selatan dan Kazakhstan dengan kadar berbeza dikenakan ke atas negara lain.
Malaysia dikenakan kadar tetap 25% sama seperti Jepun dan Korea Selatan manakala Kazakhstan turut menerima kadar sama. Afrika Selatan pula dikenakan tarif sebanyak 30% sementara Laos dan Myanmar mencatat kadar tertinggi sebanyak 40%. Trump turut memberi amaran bahawa jika mana-mana negara bertindak balas dengan menaikkan tarif terhadap produk dari Amerika Syarikat, kadar tambahan akan dikenakan di atas tarif sedia ada melebihi paras 25% yang ditetapkan ketika ini. Sebelum ini, Trump telah menetapkan had maksimum tarif sebanyak 10% hingga 9 Julai bagi memberi ruang kepada rundingan perdagangan. Namun dalam pengumuman terbaru ini, tarikh akhir rundingan telah dilanjutkan kepada 1 Ogos menerusi perintah eksekutif yang bakal ditandatangani beliau. Setakat ini hanya Britain dan Vietnam berjaya mencapai perjanjian awal dengan Washington sekaligus mengelak dikenakan tarif baru. Sementara itu, kadar tarif ke atas Korea Selatan kekal seperti pengumuman awal pada 2 April, manakala kadar untuk Jepun dinaikkan 1 mata peratusan berbanding kenyataan terdahulu. Tindakan ini dijangka memberi kesan langsung kepada ekspor Malaysia ke Amerika Syarikat, khususnya dalam sektor elektronik, produk getah dan komponen automotif yang merupakan antara penyumbang utama perdagangan dua hala.
Baik, ini perkara yang penting untuk kita bincangkan. Jadi kita akan terus bersama dengan Profesor Madya Dr. Irwan Shah Zainal Abidin, Fellow Bersekutu Kanan Ecofy UUM Universiti Utara Malaysia. Prof, pertama sekali, kalau kita lihat sebelum ini kadar tarif yang dikenakan ialah 24%, kini meningkat kepada 25% di bawah pentadbiran Trump. Kalau pada pandangan Prof, apakah implikasi segera tarif ini terhadap ekspor Malaysia khususnya dalam sektor elektrik dan juga elektronik yang merangkumi lebih 36% daripada jumlah ekspor negara serta sektor lain seperti minyak sawit dan juga perkilangan yang berasaskan komoditi. Silakan.
Implikasi segera saya fikir belum ada lah sebab kita tahu bahawa ini pun kita nampak Trump masih memberi ruang kerana dia akan dilaksanakan pada 1 Ogos. Jadi saya fikir masih ada ruang untuk negotiate, untuk berbincang apa yang boleh dilakukan untuk mengurangkan kesan tarif inilah. Tapi kalau kita lihat secara keseluruhan, saya fikir pasaran sudah pun factor in benda ni sejak bulan April lagi. Saya fikir keadaan dari segi kesan langsung daripada keadaan ini, saya fikir sudah pun dijangkakan pada bulan April lagi. Dan kalau kita lihat pun dari segi keseluruhan, tidak banyak beza pun. Saya fikir kenaikan satu mata ni selain daripada Malaysia adalah Jepun. Tetapi negara-negara lain pun kalau kita tengok pengenaan tarif daripada bulan April sehingga sekarang tidak banyak juga perbezaan yang berlaku. Jadi ini menunjukkan bahawa Trump memang serius dalam aspek pengenaan tarif ini dan sememangnya seperti juga yang saya sebutkan sebelum ini pun ia memang akan memberi kesan kepada ekonomi kita dan dari segi juga ekspor yang jika keadaan sama berlaku sehingga 1 Ogos ia memang akan memberikan kesan langsung kepada pemain-pemain industri yang melibatkan, yang berorientasikan ekspor, terutamanya juga sektor-sektor elektrik dan elektronik. Jadi saya fikir pada ketika ini kerajaan tidaklah terkejut. Saya fikir pun kita tidak perlu terkejut kerana kerajaan kita juga begitu bersedia untuk berhadapan dengan senario ini. Senario ini bukanlah kita kata satu senario yang di luar jangka. Ini adalah salah satu senario yang saya fikir sudah pun dijangka, yang saya melihat bahawa ekonomi kita bersedia dalam menghadapi cabaran ini.
Dan kenaikan 1% juga seperti yang Prof katakan tidaklah banyak beza berbanding pengumuman sebelum ini iaitu 24%. Tapi kita nak tahu juga bagaimana tarif ini dijangka akan menjejaskan imbangan dagangan Malaysia yang kini menunjukkan lebihan 10.8 bilion ringgit pada suku pertama 2025 dan juga sasaran pertumbuhan KDNK tahun ini yang telah kalau disemak semula oleh Bank Negara kepada sekitar 4.3%. Apa kesannya, Prof?
Betul. Dia akan memberi kesan dari segi, kalau kita tengok pada bulan Mei pun, data terkini bulan Mei pun sudah ada berlaku pengurangan dari segi kita punya ekspor keseluruhan lah. Begitu juga kalau ini berlaku, dia akan memberi kesan kepada imbangan pembayaran dan juga ekspor dan juga aktiviti perdagangan kita. Namun begitu, sekali lagi, kesan akhirnya adalah dia memberi kesan kepada sasaran pertumbuhan ekonomi kita. Sekali lagi, keadaan ini bukanlah sesuatu yang kita kata mengejutkan, dan memang saya pun sudah sebut sebelum ini bahawa kerajaan pun saya fikir sedang menunggu daripada penangguhan ini, dan sekarang kita dah dapat keputusannya, dan macam saya kata masih lagi ada peluang sehingga 1 Ogos, tetapi keadaan di mana keperluan untuk nak menyemak semula sasaran pertumbuhan ekonomi kita tahun ini pun memang sudah dijangka. Dan saya sudah pun sebut sebelum ini bahawa kalaupun kita mengurangkan sasaran kepada 4% pun, saya berpendapat bahawa itu adalah satu keadaan sasaran yang masih lagi munasabah dan bagi saya respectable. Dan kita juga mempunyai instrumen-instrumen yang boleh digunakan. Contohnya dari segi dasar monetary kita. Dan juga di sini saya lihat memang keperluan untuk mengurangkan OPR itu bagi saya memang sudah pun tepat pada masanya, mengambil kira keadaan ataupun perkembangan terkini ini. Tapi macam saya sebutkan tadi, walaupun kita menjangkakan adanya penyemakan semula dari segi pertumbuhan ekonomi, namun saya fikir kerajaan dari segi sektor-sektor lain masih lagi pada ketika ini tidak menampakkan kesan yang ketara dari segi dia punya kesan rantaian yang dijangka akan berlaku akibat daripada pengenaan tarif timbal balas inilah.
Prof, ingin juga kita tahu adakah Malaysia kekal pendekatan diplomatik ataupun ada kemungkinan bertindak balas melalui tarif balas, sebab kalau kita ambil kira juga amaran tarif Trump ini akan mengenakan tambahan 10% jika terdapat tindakan retaliation itu. Jadi apa pandangan Prof?
Saya tidak melihat bahawa adanya tindak balas daripada kerajaan, dan saya fikir pun daripada bulan April 3 bulan lepas pun kerajaan tidak menunjukkan apa-apa indikasi ataupun menunjukkan usaha untuk nak tindak balas. Tindak balas bagi saya bukannya strategi negara, dan yang jelas strategi kita pada ketika ini adalah mempelbagaikan ekspor, pasaran ekspor kita, dan juga mempertingkatkan dari segi kerjasama dengan negara-negara lain, terutamanya negara di Global South. Jadi saya fikir strategi yang dilakukan oleh kerajaan sekarang tepat, kerana kita ingin memfokuskan Malaysia, negara ASEAN, kita ingin memfokuskan kepada aspek multilateralism dan juga kita kata seperti juga yang Amat Berhormat Perdana Menteri sebut baru-baru ini, perlu ada satu perundingan dan juga sistem undang-undang perdagangan antarabangsa yang adil. Adil maksudnya di sini kita perlulah ada mutual respect antara satu sama lain. Bukan kita nak ada advantage antara satu sama lain. Jadi kita perlu ada mutual respect, dan daripada sana barulah kita boleh melakukan aktiviti perdagangan secara yang kita kata secara yang pasti. Jadi apa yang dilakukan oleh Trump ini, saya nampak kebanyakannya pun sudah dijangka oleh pasaran pun. Jadi apa yang dilakukan oleh Malaysia, saya fikir sudah pun begitu. Apa yang dilakukan ini adalah perkara yang memberikan satu strategi yang bagi saya pragmatik lah. Kerana kita daripada sidang kemuncak ASEAN yang ke-46 itu sebagai pengurusi ASEAN, kita telah pun memperkukuhkan dari segi kekuatan kita di dalam ASEAN, dan juga kita mempunyai memperkenalkan Malaysia melaksanakan sidang kemuncak khas ASEAN, GCC, China dan sekarang BRICS. Ini semua bagi saya adalah satu strategi yang pragmatik untuk kita berhadapan lah dengan keadaan ini, dan ini adalah keadaan yang akan berlaku dari semasa ke semasa. Maksud dia kita selepas ini tidak perlulah terkejut dengan tiba-tiba Trump akan umumkan itu dan ini, lepas tu mungkin tiba-tiba dia buat U-turn dengan hanya mengumumkan di social media, platform social media. Jadi saya fikir ini pun perlu kita nampak sebagai satu norma barulah dalam keadaan pasca Trump 2.0 ini.
Dan kita boleh anggap juga ni sebagai permainan politik oleh Trump sendiri. Mungkin secara ringkas, kita ada masa dalam lebih kurang 1 minit. Secara ringkas, Prof, mungkin bagaimana ini boleh memberi kesan pada nilai ringgit dan juga kepada sentimen pelabur terhadap pasaran kewangan tempatan, sebab kita tahu ini bukan kejutan, tapi bagaimana dengan nilai ringgit dan juga sentimen itu?
Nilai ringgit akan berubah, tetapi itu adalah pergerakan dalam jangka masa pendek. Saya rasa dalam jangka masa sederhana, ringgit akan terus stabil. Dan saya melihat tidak ada keadaan yang menyebabkan pergerakan ringgit akan melemah, kerana ada juga faktor-faktor lain yang kita perlu ambil kira dari segi kesan usaha kita untuk mempelbagaikan lagi dari segi mempelbagaikan sektor yang mempelbagaikan pasaran perdagangan kita, yang mana ini juga akan membolehkan peningkatan dalam permintaan ringgit di masa hadapan.
Baik, terima kasih diucapkan kepada Profesor Madya Dr. Irwan Shah Zainal Abidin, Fellow Bersekutu Kanan Ecofy Universiti Utara Malaysia, atas perkongsian dan juga masa yang telah diberikan. Dan kita akan teruskan dengan perkembangan seterusnya, di mana lawatan rasmi Perdana Menteri Malaysia ke 3 bandar utama dunia, Rome, Paris dan Rio de Janeiro, telah membuka ruang kerjasama strategik baru antara Khazanah Nasional Berhad dan beberapa dana kekayaan negara terkemuka dunia dalam usaha memperkukuh daya saing Malaysia di peringkat global. Pengarah urusan Khazanah Datuk Amirul Faisal Wan Zahir menyifatkan lawatan tersebut sebagai amat produktif dengan pertemuan penting bersama pengurus dana yang mengurus pelaburan bernilai lebih $1 trilion Amerika.
And in Rome, we met with Cassa Depositi Prestiti, and this is a sovereign wealth fund that has been around since 1850, so 175 years. And we have an understanding with them, MOU, and we looked at how we can collaborate when it comes to technology, when it comes to innovation, and even some of the mid-tier companies that they have that we have, and see how we can actually collaborate further. In Paris, dekat France, kami ada beberapa meeting. Satu tu dengan BPI France. BPI France adalah anak syarikat pada kerajaan Perancis dengan CDD, which is another sovereign wealth fund, which was established in 1816. So kalau tengok dekat Eropah ni, sovereign wealth fund has been centuries old. So we have a relationship dengan BPI France, where we're working to mid-tier companies and looking at how much mana dia boleh collaborate to see how they can be competitive to come to Malaysia, and we can also look at our companies to see whether we can do business dekat France. At the same time, saya alhamdulillah diajak ada breakfast meeting dengan Director General of the French Treasury, dengan the President of BPI France. So we had a good breakfast meeting, and they brought in 6 fund managers looking at innovation, looking at infrastructure for AI, and also looking at AI in general. So we had a very good discussion. And what is interesting is, Italy dengan Rome, they're all facing very similar issues to us, which is basically how do we look at being globally competitive using artificial intelligence and innovation, and how can we find new markets? Because geopolitics is actually quite different now. So that was a wonderful thing. I think in Brazil, we're actually going to meet the National Bank for Economy and Social. And that is also, I guess we might say it's a friend of ours. one of the managing directors looking at planning. We invited them to Khazanah Megatron Forums last year. So we continue that discussion dengan Brazil.
YTL Power International berhad terus memperkukuh komitmennya terhadap pembangunan teknologi kecerdasan buatan AI di Malaysia dengan pelaburan melebihi 10 bilion ringgit setakat ini. Ia termasuk pembinaan pusat data bertaraf dunia, pembangunan chip pemprosesan berprestasi tinggi dan pelancaran model bahasa besar LLM tempatan pertama negara. Menurut pengarah eksekutif YTL Power Yoh Kong Han, syarikat itu kini mengendalikan salah satu taman pusat data terbesar di dunia dengan kapasiti operasi 200 megawatt yang boleh ditingkatkan sehingga 600 megawatt. Pusat data ini turut menempatkan chip GV200 Blackwell, chip AI terpantas di dunia, hasil kerjasama strategik dengan Nvidia.
So YTL has invested more than 10 billion ringgit in AI and AI infrastructure in Malaysia to date, and created more than 2,000 jobs. So this is a huge investment in Malaysia. We want to continue to invest in this country. Now with AI, we want to make Malaysia into a global AI hub, and we have invested in data centers, GPU chips, as well as a large language model. So for the data centers, we have one of the world's largest data center parks in Malaysia. We have 200 megawatts operational, and we can go up to 600 megawatts. And we have the world's largest hyperscalers with us at our campus. We also have a partnership with Nvidia, which encompasses GPU chips. We have the world's fastest chips, the GB200 Blackwell chips, in Malaysia, in our data centers right now, and will be operational very, very soon. And with this infrastructure, we want to encourage more Malaysian companies to invest in AI and to use this infrastructure. And finally, the other thing that we also will be announcing very soon is that we have also launched Malaysia's first sovereign AI large language model called Ilmu. It is the world's best large language model in Malay. So we rank top in Malay, and it is completely sovereign. What this means is that it is built in Malaysia, built by Malaysians, and owned by Malaysians. So the data is sovereign, and we hope that the public will be able to use it very, very soon as well.
Selain itu, YTL Power juga bakal melancarkan Right Bank, bank digital pertama dunia yang berasaskan AI sepenuhnya. Bank ini direka untuk memberikan pengalaman perbankan yang intuitif, menawarkan panduan kewangan pintar dan memperkasakan pengguna melalui teknologi AI yang dibangunkan secara tempatan.
Yes, so we are also launching very soon a new digital bank called Right Bank. It is also the world's first AI-powered bank. So what this means is that you'll be able to use AI to simplify your payments, to give insights, to really power your whole banking experience. And this is something that is cutting edge, and it's not seen before. Other banks use AI maybe in the aspects of customer service or fraud management and detection, but here we're putting AI front and center.
Lawatan rasmi Perdana Menteri ke Eropah dan Amerika Selatan turut membuka peluang kepada YTL Power untuk berkongsi kepakaran dengan rakan sejawat antarabangsa sekaligus memperkukuh kedudukan Malaysia sebagai pemain utama dalam lanskap teknologi global yang kian kompetitif. Alright, Kuala Lumpur is ranked 18th globally in the Global Startup Ecosystem Report GSER 2025's top 20 emerging startup ecosystems. And this is the first time Malaysia has entered the top 20, making it one of the fastest risers globally and second in Southeast Asia, just behind Jakarta. And the GSER by Startup Genome is the world's most authoritative analysis of over 290 innovation ecosystems worldwide, using 5 core success factors, which is performance, funding, market reach, talent and experience, and knowledge. So to discuss further, we're joined by Norman Matthew Van Hakke, the Group CEO of Cradle Fund. Thank you so much for joining me this morning. First of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
On making it the top 20 for the GSER report. But if you could share with us, Norman, what does this milestone mean for Malaysia, not just for the ranking, but the whole ecosystem of startups in Malaysia?
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me today. I think this news is actually something that we've been eagerly awaiting ever since 2021, when we first launched our Malaysia Startup Ecosystem Roadmap, which is a 10-year roadmap to place ourselves into the top 20 of the global ranking. So right now we are in the top 20 of the emerging ranking. So we still have a bit of a work to do to get into the top which is like the Premier League, if you say, of the startup ecosystem. But having said that, it is a very encouraging move. But not only that, a lot of things actually, a lot of very interesting things actually happened in the past year in 2024. Not just KL, but also other Asian ecosystems as well. Singapore, you see Korea, Seoul, Bengaluru, Hong Kong, and Chinese cities all rising up. Which is very, very encouraging. A lot of attention into this region, actually, on the global perspective.
I mean, this is not an overnight success.
Yeah.
It's often the result of years of strategic effort. But what were some of the key initiatives or turning points that has helped us reach this level?
So if you look at the report itself, you compare between the previous years and this year, the stark difference will be in that market reach category. So what does market reach means? So market reach is about how our startups can immerse themselves into not just the local market, but also beyond as well. So I think, but of course, when Startup Genome looks into emerging ecosystems, the calculations are slightly different compared to global ecosystems. So just to make it a bit more apple to apple. But having said that, as an emerging ecosystem, we are actually one of the top in terms of market reach, or the capability of our startups to enter into different markets. If I could say, being a 10 out of 10 is kind of like the maximum score that we can get, actually. I think that's very commendable.
And let's drill more into the GSER report itself. Where exactly did Kuala Lumpur perform best, and what does that tell towards our competitive edge as a whole?
Yeah. I think historically, in terms of our performance as an ecosystem in the emerging category has been quite strong. Ever since 2021, when we first started to track, we've been consistently in the 21st to 30th band. But bearing in mind that the emerging ecosystem ranks 100 top emerging ecosystems. So that also includes Taipei, also Lisbon, and other international cities as well. So it is no mean feat for us to actually be able to consistently be at the top end of the emerging ecosystem ranking. And having broken through into the top 20 is very significant. So when we look at the categories, right? So performance has always been strong. Funding-wise, especially at the early stage, has been strong. Our talent, the experience of our startup founders has been strong. And it's the first time that our market reach has actually gone up by leaps and bounds. But we still have that challenge in terms of the knowledge category. So knowledge here means the complexity of the patents that we produce and bring into the market. I think that's a bit of a challenge, not just for Malaysia, but for other ASEAN ecosystems as well. So this includes even Singapore as well, if you look at the global ranking. So there are certain areas that we are going to focus into. But what we have right now, which has led to where we are today, we will continue to strengthen. But I think moving forward, we will focus more on how do we actually bring out our research, our technology that we develop in our academia side, out into the market and into the world.
Having that said, with all the figures that you mentioned, that not all numbers were rosy, and having reached another milestone, that's a great significant milestone. But the GSER noted that KL's ecosystem value dropped from $47 billion to 4.8 billion. So how should that worry us?
Well, I mean, to give a bit of a context, we had a bit of a over-inflationary effect post-pandemic. So in 2021, if we look into the report, actually, in terms of valuation as an ecosystem, globally, 1.7 trillion in 2021, collectively as a global. But in 2024, it actually gone down 6 times lower. It is now $267 billion. So we're not the only one who's affected. Everyone is affected. So, I mean, that brings its own challenges as well when some companies may have been overinflated during those years. It's a bit tough for us to find exits typically. to raise exits, to, in a sense, recycle back the capital into the ecosystem. So that's actually one of the other key challenges that we're trying to face as well, that we're going to focus on going forward.
You mentioned about capital. Let's talk capital, where it's actually often the lifeblood for the any startup scene. But what's the outlook on funding now, in your opinion, and particularly for early startup stage?
Well, if you just focus on the early stage startups, actually between previous year and this year's report, actually we've gone up.
Okay.
So previously the reports mentioned $255 million available for a 2.5-year period. So that period has now moved into 2024, where it's now $368 million for a 2.5-year period within the Kuala Lumpur ecosystem. But of course, the country at large is actually even more, because that is just counting KL and the greater areas. So if we look at early stage, support from the government, I think, is still remains strong. Our grants have actually gone out to more recipients now. If you remember KL20 event last year, where a lot of new VC venture capital initiatives were announced, right? So Jelawan Capital has just recently announced the fund managers, Dana Printers from Co-op, Blue Chip Ventures. All those actually play in driving funding into the ecosystem. But having said that, I think there's a lot of interest out there as well to come into the region via Malaysia. I think that's a very interesting thing. If I can add on a little bit more.
We got time.
Yeah. So one of the things that we're trying to actually lift up our position as an ecosystem is actually that we are this year actually leading the ASEAN Startup Initiative. So to be there in the global space, we need to position Malaysia as a hub. So hence why we need to create the attraction. What we did and what has happened in KL20 last year, a lot of initiatives meant to drive attention into the ecosystem, into Malaysia. So it's a lot of that that are starting to come in, a lot of interest. But having said that, another part that we are looking at is how do we then ensure that all the attention really comes into Malaysia and stays in Malaysia. Yeah. We're looking into, hence why we are collaborating a lot in trying to unearth our innovative potential within the patents and the technologies that's developed within the universities. There's a lot there actually. It's a treasure trove of technologies.
But this news is a new momentum for us, for the whole ecosystem of startups, and momentum is great, but sustaining is the real test. So how do we actually to maintain moving forward with this, by building this momentum, and what challenges could actually, be the real test for this?
Typically, when it comes to the startup ecosystem itself, right, the biggest challenge is that it's a very high risk in nature. So there's a lot of apprehension, especially the way we were brought up. We are a bit more risk averse. But having said that, that mindset has been changing over the years. So there's more and more risk taking. Of course, it was catalyzed by the government by de-risking, especially in the early stage. So hence why we provided grants, a lot of support at the very early stage, and then going forward into the later stages, that's where the private funding will start to take over. But having said that, it is really encouraging as well to see a lot of private investments also happening at the early stage. We have our angel networks, the Malaysia Business Angel Networks, established in 2015, and also gaining momentum. They've already opened up chapters in other states in Malaysia, Penang, Sarawak, and a few others that are coming. We have our ECF, equity crowdfunding. We have a P2P. So there's actually a lot of support or options available, actually. And we're actually looking into other types of early stage funding as well. It is critical to build that early critical mass so that, all that flows into the later stages. Yeah.
We have about 2 minutes left. Perhaps we could say something to the audience, perhaps the founders, aspiring entrepreneurs, and also investors. What message could you convey to them?
Well, my message to everybody is, take this as a motivation for us to work as an ecosystem, not just for KL, but I think for the whole country as well. There's a lot of interest right now. There's a lot of support that's coming, even at the city level. So we are very, very encouraged by that. And so we would really love for everybody to come together. Let's come together as a country. Let's push ourselves. Let's take that risk. Don't just, be good where we are here. There's a lot of opportunities out there. And we here at Cradle are really looking forward to being able to open the doors, facilitate your entrance into new markets, new areas, new technologies, in order to propel ourselves to our ultimate vision to be ultimately top global startup ecosystem by 2030.
All right, there was Norman Matthew Van Hacker, the Group CEO of Cradle Fund, and we hope to actually empower these startups more to actually reach the Premier League I mentioned earlier.
Yes.
So thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me this morning on Niaga AWANI, and you can find the whole discussion on all of our social media platforms, and that includes astroawani.com.
Di dalam setiap berita yang dibawa, konteks amat penting. Cara kita mendapat berita kian berubah. Melalui media sosial maupun saluran digital yang lain serta kaca TV. Kami sentiasa membawakan yang tergempar dan terkini.
Kita buat sesuatu yang berbeza.
Berteraskan acuan verifikasi yang diamalkan supaya setiap fakta adalah sahih. Daripada analisis pelbagai sudut yang mendalam, laporan-laporan khas dan perbincangan yang membina negara. Inklusif, suara rakyat kami ajukan. Keseimbangan persepsi kami pastikan. Kerana setiap cerita mempunyai impak yang tersendiri dan perlu dibawa dengan penelitian yang terperinci. Pastikan Astro AWANI menjadi pilihan anda tidak kira di mana sahaja anda berada. Saluran berita paling dipercayai di Malaysia.
Baik, bertemu kembali dalam Niaga AWANI. Untuk waktu ini kita akan membincangkan satu isu yang kian mendesak, iaitu perlindungan sosial untuk pekerja sektor informal yang sering kali terpinggir daripada sistem keselamatan sosial sedia ada. Jadi untuk kita berbincang lanjut, kita terus bersama dengan Profesor Dr. Ahmad Razman, pengarah program MBA Putra Business School. Prof, Assalamualaikum. Pertama sekali, bercakap mengenai keperluan informasi sistem keselamatan sosial negara, khususnya untuk pekerja informal ini, apa cabaran utama sebenarnya yang kita hadapi dalam memastikan kumpulan ini tidak terus tercicir? Silakan Prof.
Ya, apabila kita melihat statistik terkini daripada Jabatan Perangkaan Malaysia, memang menunjukkan bahawa tenaga kerja kita semakin meningkat, pengangguran berkurangan kerana majoriti penduduk kita yang mampu bekerja mempunyai pekerjaan. Tetapi realitinya bentuk pekerjaan itu sudah bertukar apabila lebih ramai yang memilih untuk bekerja secara tidak formal, yang mengutamakan flexibility dari segi waktu bekerja, dan juga yang tidak hanya bekerja di dalam pejabat tetapi kesana ke sini seperti bekerja gig. Dan apabila kita lihat situasi ini yang mana ramai pekerja memilih kebebasan dari segi masa, dari segi tempat, dari segi flexibility untuk bekerja di mana, menyebabkan perlu ada penelitian, perlu ada kajian, adakah sistem keselamatan sosial Malaysia mengambil kira perubahan dari segi jenis pekerjaan sekarang, adakah nasib dan juga hak setiap pekerja itu dilindungi seperti sebelum ini.
Pada pandangan Prof, kalau kita lihat kepada sistem keselamatan sosial Malaysia, khususnya di bawah Perkeso, kini terlalu ketinggalan kalau kita boleh katakan dalam menangani realiti pasaran buruh moden seperti kerja fleksibel dan juga mobiliti tinggi dan juga kebanjiran pekerja dalam sektor tidak formal. Jadi bagaimana Prof boleh kita bincangkan perkara ini?
Ya, saya setuju bahawa ada sedikit ketinggalan dan memang ianya tidak dinafikan. Sebagai contoh, Perkeso mendapati bahawa daripada tahun lalu, daripada 86,000 lebih kes kemalangan, hanya 66,000 saja yang boleh dimasukkan dalam perlindungan, kerana selebihnya berlaku di luar waktu pekerjaan dan bukan di premis perniagaan. Dan apabila kita lihat banyak pekerja yang mengalami kemalangan ini tidak dapat mendapat perlindungan di bawah Perkeso, dan ini akan berjejaskan tanggungan mereka, keluarga mereka, kerana mereka ini mungkin adalah pencari nafkah utama. Oleh itu bagus per keso mengenal pasti kepincangan ataupun ketidakcukupan dalam sistem perlindungan sekarang. Yang lebih penting adalah usaha untuk memastikan bahawa selepas ini kesemua pekerja dapat dilindungi melalui skim bencana kerja yang ditambah baik.
Saya nak kaitkan dengan gaji, di mana kalau kita lihat kenaikan gaji minimum dan juga penstrukturan semula gaji penjawat awam pada 2025 memberi sedikit ruang sebenarnya. Dan namun bagaimana kerajaan nak pastikan perlindungan ini tidak datang dengan kos ekonomi jangka panjang ataupun melebarkan jurang sosial itu lebih besar sendiri?
Memang itu yang kita harapkan apabila pekerja mendapat perlindungan yang komprehensif, tetapi pada masa yang sama tidak menyebabkan lebihan pendapatan mereka terjejas, kerana walaupun gaji naik tetapi ditolak pula dengan jumlah yang banyak untuk masuk perlindungan ini. Di situ saya lihat pertama, apabila kita menyebut tentang gaji minimum, skim gaji progresif, semuanya adalah langkah penambahbaikan yang akan berterusan. Kita tidak mahu gaji minimum kekal 1,700. Kita mahu supaya industri majikan akan mengambil inisiatif untuk membayar lebih tinggi. Dan kita nampak ada syarikat sudah mula mengambil pendekatan membayar gaji yang lebih tinggi, yang lebih bermaruah. Kerana apabila kita lihat median gaji pekerja formal masih rendah, sekitar 2,700. Oleh itu, saya melihat dengan usaha memastikan gaji yang diperoleh oleh rakyat terus meningkat, ini akan membolehkan bahawa mereka boleh menikmati kualiti hidup yang lebih baik walaupun sumbangan untuk perlindungan sosial ini telah bertambah untuk memastikan ia lebih komprehensif.
Dan kalau kita, Prof telah katakan jumlah ataupun statistik jumlah pekerja sektor formal meningkat dan kita diangka akan terus meningkat dalam tahun-tahun mendatang. Jadi bagaimana dengan peranan skim kemalangan bukan bencana kerja ataupun SKBBK ini sebenarnya mampu menjadi pemangkin kepada pembaharuan struktur sosial yang benar-benar inklusif dan tidak meminggirkan golongan-golongan ataupun pekerja tidak formal ini?
Ya, memang kita lihat jumlah pekerja tidak formal ini dijangka akan terus meningkat dan kita juga mahu melihat skim kebarangan bukan bencana kerja ini akan mampu melindungi mereka. Apabila ia dapat dilaksanakan melindungi kesemua pekerja termasuk pekerja sektor informal, maka ia akan memberikan satu assurance, satu jaminan bahawa mereka mampu untuk bekerja tanpa perlu risau bahawa sesuatu bencana yang berlaku itu akan menyebabkan mereka tidak mampu untuk menampung keluarga mereka lagi ataupun untuk pulih dengan segera tanpa dibebankan dengan masalah kos kesihatan yang tinggi. Oleh itu saya melihat jaminan ini perlu dijadikan satu kewajipan, bukannya voluntary ataupun voluntary seperti yang ada sekarang ini. Dan di situ saya lihat apabila ia benar-benar dapat dilaksanakan, maka tidak ada perbezaan dari segi hak ataupun perlindungan yang diterima oleh pekerja formal dan juga pekerja informal.
Tapi Prof, kalau jika perlindungan skim ini terus tertangguh ataupun dilaksanakan separuh jalan, mungkin apa kemungkinan risiko jangka panjang kepada kestabilan pasaran buruh dan juga matlamat Malaysia nak capai status negara berpendapatan tinggi menjelang tahun 2030 nanti?
Ya, sebab kita lihat apabila kita tidak mempunyai satu skim perlindungan ataupun undang-undang yang melindungi pekerja secara keseluruhan, ini akan memberikan satu persepsi yang agak negatif bahawa kita hanya melindungi pekerja tertentu dan meminggirkan pekerja informal yang sebenarnya akan menjadi antara peratusan pekerja yang semakin tinggi peningkatannya dan mungkin akan lebih menyumbang kepada ekonomi negara. Kita tidak boleh nafikan bahawa apabila kita menyebut sebagai contoh pekerja gig, ia bukan hanya merujuk kepada mereka yang bekerja menghantar barangan atau makanan, tetapi skop dia lebih luas. Mereka yang menyediakan perkhidmatan, perundingan, peraturcaraan, reka bentuk yang bekerja di rumah, yang bekerja di mana-mana tempat, dan mereka ini perlu dilindungi kerana mereka ini sebenarnya turut meraih gaji yang tinggi dan mereka mampu untuk mencarum untuk perlindungan sosial ini. Oleh itu saya melihat sebenarnya fokus terhadap perlindungan kepada pekerja informal ini harus diambil berat kerana sumbangan mereka akan memberi impak yang lebih besar kepada negara dalam tahun-tahun akan mendatang.
Mungkin sedikit nasihat ataupun cadangan yang boleh Prof bagi ataupun utarakan kepada pekerja-pekerja informal ini, mungkin dengan ketidaktentuan ini, apa yang mereka boleh sediakan dari segi inisiatif tersendiri?
Ya, sudah tentu kita mengharapkan mereka mempunyai pengetahuan pengurusan kewangan dan perlindungan sosial supaya mereka sedar bahawa mereka sepatut merancang apabila mendapat gaji, sebahagian boleh disumbangkan, dicarungkan untuk masuk perlindungan kesihatan sebagai insurans ataupun untuk persediaan persaraan seperti saraan dan juga mencarum di dalam perkeso untuk skim kemalangan bukan bencana kerja. Namun kita fahamlah bahawa tahap pemahaman itu perlu sentiasa dipertingkatkan dan alternatif ataupun kaedah yang kerajaan sedang ambil sekarang ialah memastikan bahawa segala perlindungan ini dijadikan sebagai mandatory melalui akta undang-undang, dan saya melihat itu satu langkah yang bagus. Sekurang-kurangnya mereka dilindungi secara minimum, tetapi dengan pendekatan kefahaman pendidikan yang lebih holistik merangkumi semua jenis pekerja, kita harapkan mereka akan mengambil inisiatif sendiri untuk memastikan bahawa mereka akan mampu menjalani kerja mereka dengan lebih amanah, sebab tidak perlu risau jika apa-apa situasi berlaku, mereka telah dilindungi dengan pelbagai caruman dan skim ini.
Baik, jadi semua pihak perlu memainkan peranan masing-masing, syarikat swasta, kerajaan, agensi dan individu itu sendiri perlu memainkan peranan penting untuk kita terus memberikan perubahan yang positif bergerak pada masa hadapan. Jadi terima kasih ucapkan kepada Profesor Dr. Ahmad Azman, pengarah program MBA Putra Business School. Baik, saya akan teruskan dengan prestasi ringgit, di mana ringgit ditutup rendah berbanding dolar Amerika Syarikat pada Isnin, namun diniagakan kukuh berbanding mata wang utama. Berikutan peniaga dan pelabur sedang memantau perkembangan tarif baru Amerika Syarikat, dan ini menurut seorang penganalisis. Dan pada 6 petang semalam, mata wang utama itu susut kepada 4.2310 berbanding dolar Amerika ketika ditutup pada Jumaat. Baik, untuk prestasi hari ringgit pada setakat hari ini, kita dapat saksikan ia berada pada paras 4.2410 untuk setakat jam 9.44 pagi 8 Julai 2025. Dan jika untuk pengetahuan penonton, jika graf itu menurun, nilai ringgit itu mengukuh, dan jika graf itu menaik, nilai ringgit itu melemah berbanding dengan 1 dolar Amerika. Dan 4.241 ini kalau kita nak bandingkan dengan hari sebelumnya, 7 hari bulan, nilai ringgit itu kukuh pada 4.2146. Namun selepas pengumuman tarif terbaru oleh Trump pada pagi ini yang mengenakan 25% kepada Malaysia dan kepada beberapa negara lain, nilai ringgit itu kita dapat lihat bergerak, orang kata melemah sehinggalah mencapai paras 4.241 untuk setakat pagi ini. Itu adalah berkenaan dengan nilai ringgit. Namun bursa Malaysia ditutup rendah pada Isnin berbanding prestasi tinggi pada akhir dagangan minggu lepas apabila pasaran serantau mengalami penurunan. Berikutan pelabur kembali berhati-hati menjelang tarikh akhir tarif Amerika Syarikat pada 9 Julai, kata penganalisis. Pasaran tempatan menjejaki penurunan di seluruh Asia apabila pelabur menunggu keputusan muktamad daripada Presiden Amerika Syarikat Donald Trump berkaitan perkara perdagangan yang tertangguh. Pada 5 petang, FTSE Bursa Malaysia KLCI atau FBM KLCI susut 12.65 mata atau 0.82% kepada 1537.54 daripada 1550 ketika ditutup pada Jumaat lepas. Dan untuk setakat pada pagi ini, kalau kita dapat saksikan pada jam 9.31 pagi, parasnya adalah 1528.89, turun 0.56% atau 8.65 mata. Dan kalau boleh kita tunjukkan dalam jangka masa seminggu, pergerakan FBM KLCI itu kekal kukuh dalam jajaran antara 1540 dan 1550. Namun memasuki saja minggu baru, euro hari Isnin. Ia jatuh menjunam sehinggalah ke paras 1,535. Ini adalah berikutan sentimen pelabur yang berhati-hati menjelang hari-hari akhir 90 hari pos yang dikenakan oleh Presiden Donald Trump Amerika Syarikat berkenaan dengan tarif timbal balik yang diumumkan beliau pada 2 April lalu, dan itu adalah pergerakan ataupun prestasi Bursa Bursa Malaysia KLCI untuk setakat pagi ini. Namun kita akan terus dengan perkembangan antarabangsa seterusnya. Trump Media and Technology Group launched its TV streaming platform Truth Plus globally on Monday, featuring the cable channel Newsmax to support the company's expansion. The move also allows conservative news outlet Newsmax, which went public in March, to increase its presence outside the United States. Trump Media said users can now access streaming channels and on-demand video through Truth Plus apps on iOS, Android, web and connected TV platforms, including Apple TV, Android TV, Amazon Fire TV and Roku. The company, which operates the social media platform Truth Social, began beta testing the global rollout of Truth Plus in late June. Trump Media said it would continue to beta test the streaming technology and collect user feedback as the rollout progresses. Shares of Trump Media and Technology Group rose about 0.6% at $19.06, while Newsmax shares fell 2.6% to $14.65 in morning trading. Wall Street's major indexes closed lower on Monday, July 7th, after US President Donald Trump announced hefty tariffs against Japan, South Korea and other trading partners, while Tesla shares sank after CEO Elon Musk said he was forming a new US political party. Indexes added to losses after Trump announced the tariff rates against Japanese and South Korean imports due to take effect on August 1st. Stocks wobbled further in the late afternoon when he announced hefty tariffs on Malaysia, Kazakhstan, South Africa, Laos and Myanmar.
The White House announced Monday that the US will impose 25% tariffs on all imports from Japan and South Korea starting August 1st. President Donald Trump revealed the move in letters addressed to both leaders, part of a broader effort to pressure trading partners into new agreements. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said 12 more countries will receive similar letters in the coming days. Trump also signed an executive order delaying the previous July 9th deadline to reach tariff deals, now extended to August 1st. In the letters, Trump warned that any retaliatory tariffs would result in an additional surcharge on top of the 25%. The administration also announced tariffs on Malaysia, Kazakhstan, South Africa, Laos and Myanmar, with rates ranging up to 40%. US markets reacted to the move, with the S&P 500 falling nearly 1% and shares of Japanese automakers sliding. Negotiations are ongoing, with some countries still seeking last-minute deals to avoid the levies.
I have the signed letters that went out to both South Korea and Japan today, and there will be approximately 12 other countries that will receive notifications and letters directly from the President of the United States. And weeks ago, I stood at this podium and I told all of you that the President was going to create tailor-made trade plans for each and every country on this planet. And that's what this administration continues to be focused on. The President will also sign an executive order today delaying the July 9th deadline to August 1st. So the reciprocal tariff rate, or these new rates that will be provided in this correspondence to these foreign leaders, will be going out the door within the next month, or deals will be made. And those countries continue to negotiate with the United States. We've seen a lot of positive developments in the right direction, but the administration, the President and his trade team want to cut the best deals for the American people and the American worker. That's what they're focused on.
Last week, both the Nasdaq and the S&P 500 ended 3 sessions with record high closes. The latest record finishes came on Thursday after a robust jobs report.
All right, following that latest announcement, now let's break down what's happening in the US stock market. And behind me is Standard & Poor's 500 index stocks categorized by sectors and industries, and the size represents market cap. And behind me there's a mix of red and also green. Red means losses and also green means gains. I'm going to start with Apple first. And Apple shows red color over here. It was decreased or down by 1.69%, and the current stock price is 209.95. And the latest updates on Apple is Apple took a challenge against EU regulators to Europe's second highest court on Monday after they fined it 500 million euros earlier this year for breaching landmark rules aimed at curbing the power of big tech. The European Commission, in a decision in April, said the iPhone maker's technical and commercial restrictions that prevent app developers from steering users to cheaper deals outside the App Store breached the Digital Markets Act. Apple, which had previously said it would seek legal redress, filed its lawsuit on Monday, the deadline for doing so. Last month, Apple overhauled its App Store rules to comply with the EU order to scrap its technical and commercial curbs on app developers in order to avoid daily fines of 5% of its average daily worldwide revenue, or about 50 million euros per day. All right, that's on Apple. Moving on to Amazon, it was decreased a little by 0.03%, and the current stock price is 223.47, and that's under the internet retail or consumer cycle. But a federal judge in Seattle on Monday said tens of millions of users of Amazon.com's cloud-based voice service, Alexa, can band together in a class action accusing the tech giant of deceptively recording and collecting their private conversations. The Alexa users met the legal threshold to sue in nationwide class action for monetary damages and a court order to stop the alleged privacy violations, U.S. District Judge Robert Lesnick said in his ruling. The lawsuit, brought on behalf of users who registered one or more Alexa devices, alleges Amazon violated Washington's consumer protection law by failing to disclose the retention and use of recordings for commercial gain. Class action status will allow the plaintiffs to pursue large-scale claims against Amazon as a group, as opposed to filing individual claims. All right, moving on to Tesla, it shows the red color as well, down by 6.79%, and the current stock price is 293.94, and the similar is Ford, down by 1.86%, and also for General Motors, GM, also down by 2.02%. But the latest update on Tesla shares fell nearly 8% on Monday after CEO Elon Musk plans to launch a new US political party, reignited concerns about his commitment to the company's future as it struggles with declining sales. Musk unveiled the America Party over the weekend after a public dispute with President Donald Trump on the tax cut and spending bill. Trump, once an ally of Musk, called the latest idea ridiculous. Trump had threatened to cut off the billions of dollars in subsidies that Musk companies receive after their feud erupted into an all-out social media brawl in early June, wiping off $115 billion in Tesla's market value in a single day. Musk's political move comes days after Tesla posted the second straight drop in quarterly deliveries, pressuring its stock, which has lost 35% since hitting a record high in December and is the worst performing among the Magnificent Seven this year. Tesla needs to deliver more than 1 million vehicles in the second half to avoid another decline in annual sales, which is a tall task due to tariff-driven economic uncertainty and backlash over Musk's political stance. All right, we'll go for a short break. We'll be right back after this with a discussion with World Economic Forum.
Asia tumpuan utama dunia. Dengan ekonomi yang semakin rancak, pembangunan lestari dan tenaga boleh diperbaharui, apakah pula impak kecerdasan buatan AI dalam perkembangan teknologi dan masa depan pekerjaan? Kami mendalami setiap berita dan cerita. Saksikan diskusi, dialog dan laporan khas di Agenda AWANI Asia bersama koresponden khas kami setiap Sabtu 9 malam di semua platform Astro AWANI.
GP Kuala Lumpur kini meledakkan lagi perjuangan pahlawan, membuka langkah mencatur gerakan.
Permulaan yang baik.
sasaran.
Gegar gempita pertarungan warisan, menyeru semangat generasi masa hadapan.
Mendebarkan, itu memberikan mata kemenangan.
Aksi legasi kini mendominasi Celcom Digi Sepak Takraw League secara langsung di Astro Arena dan Astro Go.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this panel on the missing stories of tech progress and how we can scale innovation from the ground up, no matter where you are in the world. Today, whether it is the remote islands in the Pacific or inland farms in sub-Saharan Africa, people are building and using technologies to solve some deeply local problems. Problems that help farmers get fair prices, tools that monitor climate impact in real time, and digital payment systems that work where banks do not. But these stories very rarely break into the global tech discourse, and yet they matter, not just for the communities they serve, but for the future of inclusive innovation. Over the next 30 minutes or so, we'll discuss what's at stake if narrative imbalances persist when it comes to innovation happening outside your usual bubble, and what needs to change for these technologies to scale beyond those ecosystems. And to discuss this, I'm delighted to be joined by a great panel. We have Heidi Gardner, Distinguished Fellow at the Center on the Legal Profession, the Harvard Law School, and Yusuf Yusuf, CEO of LG Sonic, who's based in the Netherlands. Welcome. I would like to begin with each of your impressions of the way we define innovation. Right, and where we think it happens. So why do you think some of the most impactful tech stories, whether it's built for fish farmers in Indonesia or remote transport hubs in sub-Saharan Africa or rural weather forecasting in the Pacific, why are they often missing from the global conversation? Heidi, maybe I can start with you.
Absolutely. So I should tell you, my bias coming in, my PhD is in organizational behavior. So I take a very kind of human psychological perspective on this idea of innovation. And there's a very wonky term that probably nobody uses in their day-to-day language, homophily. Right? Homophily is the natural human tendency to affiliate with people, to trust, even to like them more if we perceive that they're our in-group. Right? And this relates to this question of innovation because if we perceive that this innovation is something very foreign, you said deeply local, the flip side of that is deeply foreign, and it makes it, I think, hard for people to understand how this is important to us. So when I was thinking about preparing for this, knowing that I had just gotten off a plane and I might not remember it otherwise, I came up with a simplistic way for me to remember what to say, 3 R's. Relatability, relevance, and revenue. So from a very Western mindset, you heard that I'm at Harvard, I think the relatability question is, are these people, whether it's the innovators, the people who are using the innovation, et cetera, are they relatable to me? Can I imagine them as part of my in-group? The relevance is, what does this technology mean for me? And I think oftentimes people lack the imagination to think about readoption in different contexts, and so relevance is crucially important. And then revenue is really my way of a shortcut for saying, is this scalable in ways that people can imagine taking it to market, whatever that market looks like. And I think all 3 R's have to be in place, or at least us to think about them very intentionally before we are communicating about these innovations.
That's a very helpful framework to think about. Yusuf, what do you think? Why are these kind of technologies missing from the global convo?
So first, let's define what is innovation. So definitely innovation is not figuring out a new technology to do something. You will talk about innovation if you will be able to scale it and to have a serious impact. So, and I think that's the missing link in the discussion. So if you will take an example, the electric cars. The lithium battery by itself was invented many years ago. but we adapted the technology and we could scale it once we be able to control the supply chain. We had the regulation in place. So it's a total aspect you need to integrate before you will have impact on international level. And then the story will be relevant. Mm-hmm. So that's my view on innovation and scaling.
That's helpful. When these local tech stories are invisible, when we can't make them relevant, right? The people and systems behind them also become invisible. And that has real world consequences. You know, we do a lot of stories from emerging markets and non-Western sort of like markets around the world. Heidi, you work at the intersection of leadership and institutions. What do major global actors, whether it's investors, regulators, academic institutions, what do they miss when they're overlooking grassroots or regionally built technologies?
I think we miss oftentimes the real spark, right? So innovation, the way many people define it, is not just creativity, but as you said, it's creativity that gets applied for a useful purpose. And thinking about whether it's investors or other kinds of institutions missing out on this grassroots innovation, they're missing that initial spark so that you can have that recombination of ideas with the creativity. And you're missing the application side, because if you can figure out how to take any given new idea and put it into practice in an area of deep constraints, right? Whether you're missing some kind of resources, whether it's an environment where you're deeply challenged on other dimensions, we know that those kinds of resource constraints are actually important for sparking creativity, right? The creativity is the mother of invention, the necessity is the mother of invention, right? And so when we're missing out on both the initial ideas and how to apply them in resource-constrained areas, you're missing major parts of the value chain for innovation.
Yeah. Yusuf, I want to ask you a little bit about examples, and you can answer that question as well. Your company, LG Sonic, you work in some of the most challenging environments, 50-plus countries, right? And sometimes under the radar, the kind of work that you're doing. Can you share a story of implementing this tech in a place that doesn't often feature in the global innovation narrative, and where maybe the impact was transformative, but it was hard to kind of pierce through the news cycle, if you will?
So maybe let's go back about 12 years ago. I had the idea to control the algae, which is a biological contamination. Is that the biggest contamination in surface water? And you treat algae normally with the chemicals. And I had the idea to use ultrasound, is the same technology for gender reveal, to control the algae. And of course, nobody will believe it will work. Even I will not believe myself it will work, right? So and then now 12 years later, we are indeed at this moment, we are active in 75 countries with 5 offices around the world. And maybe one of the most interesting story of impact, it was in Dominican Republic.
Can you, if I can ask you, can you tell the audience what specifically, this tech is for folks who don't know?
So again, we treat water, surface water, lakes, dams, reservoirs. We treat it with ultrasound to control the algae. The algae, the cyanobacteria, they might look nice and green, but they produce toxin, and which is extremely bad if you will use that water source as your drinking water. So what we invented floating platform powered by solar panels, which will monitor the water real time. Every 10 minutes, we will have a complete scan on the water quality. And then it will send to the cloud. We have AI, which will predict the water quality, and then we will treat it with ultrasound. And each one buoy can treat about 500 meters in diameter. Our customers are, again, government agencies and like that. So sorry for doing a pitch on my company, but anyway, that's what we do. But it gives you some insights on the story I'm going to follow up. So I went to Dominican Republic to see one of the dams in there, which is the drinking water resource of 2 million in Santo Domingo. And it was heavily contaminated with the cyanobacteria. So the idea was, of course, if you will treat it with chemicals, but the budget and the impact on the ecosystem with the chemicals will be huge. So we had to integrate our technology, which was for them unknown. And then after about 4 months, I went there, and the water had a significant better quality, and we had a huge impact finally on the human in Dominican Republic, because they are drinking that water. Mm-hmm. And that's the impact you can create. But the road to be there, it took us about 12 years.
Yeah. And there are hundreds and hundreds of stories like that in countries around the world. I want to talk a little bit about policy and power as a way to think about unlocking opportunities for innovation around the world. Heidi, what kind of policy or legal blind spots are keeping these kind of innovations, like the one Yusuf just talked about, from scaling beyond their local context? Is it more of a global regulatory framework, simply not built to recognize innovation from outside Silicon Valley or outside Silicon Valley-like centers of power?
Well, I mean, I think we have to admit there's a whole lot of economic interest behind what counts as an innovation, right? And I think for an easy example, let's look at what's happening with AI regulation right now. To say it's a patchwork is optimistic, right? It's a mess. It is a tangled web of spaghetti that is a real mess. At the states, in the US, you even have state-level regulation. And so when you look at regulatory frameworks, trying to figure out how innovators are using the regulatory framework to bring these to market or even get the attention that they need, we have to be deeply aware of what some of those barriers are. One of the statistics I just read, a McKinsey report a few days ago, said that when it comes to AI-related innovations, innovative teams are spending 30 to 40% of their time on compliance. Right? That is just, frankly, wasted energy, and it means that really important breakthroughs are getting to market or getting tested weeks, months, far later than they should. Yeah. So how do we use policy and regulation to unlock that potential? And I think it's going to be particularly challenging in today's world where we're seeing so much polarization.
I was in this panel earlier this morning on how China uses AI, and I think one of the things that was said about regulation, which hopefully I can remember, it's said, like, what stage do you apply regulation, right? Because when you think about innovation, there are 3 stages. There is invention, there is adoption, and then there is kind of dissemination, right? Like widespread kind of like use. So thinking about at what stage do you really apply regulation, that makes a huge difference.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, part of the problem right now is that we've got such a lag in what regulators understand. And so we haven't even caught up to what exists right now, let alone being able to predict what we're going to need in terms of a policy framework.
Yeah. Yusuf, as someone who's building tech with environmental and more public sector applications, what kinds of credibility barriers do you face when you're entering underserved markets, particularly, let's say, like, non-European, non-Western markets?
Yeah, I would call it the 3 unknowns. So when you will start a business in the green tech sector, if Elon Musk will start the same technology, it will be easy because he's a known entrepreneur or a known company. But most of the green tech startups comes from unknown business or an unknown entrepreneur. So that's the first challenge. And then, most of the time, because it's a breakthrough technology, is an unknown technology. So if Elon Musk was selling lithium batteries, it's easy. Everyone knows Elon Musk, everyone knows it. But if it's a Yusuf selling ultrasound to control the algae, that's a different story. So you have to overwin these 2 unknowns. And the third one, I will call it the unknown giant on the road you don't know while you are scaling. For me, it was control the supply chain. All the government agencies, but also the corporates, were built on using the chemicals. They had the OPEX, they had the regulation to apply that. So it was very difficult to enter. And the question is, how did we succeed? Mm-hmm. Of course, you need to have like a bit of luck. But the most important for us is we could guarantee the water utility, American Water, which is the water utility in the United States, to test our equipment for 1 year. And they are going to publish that report how it works, and if it worked, and what was the benefit. And having that reference from a very strong organization as American Water really helped us scale. And at this moment, we are all over the world. We build digital twins for the Ministry of Waters around the world. But it all started with that one project with the 4 buoys. So you need to get your technology known and verified, and you need to get yourself known and verified. And I think that was, looking back, the biggest challenge.
I think it comes down a lot to credibility, right? Credibility
Right, exactly.
and trust.
Yeah.
Right? And the trust is often missing. Forgive me, I'm repeating myself for some of the folks who were just in a prior session with me, but when we think about trust, we think of 2 kinds of trust. We think about competence trust. So is the technology going to work? Is the entrepreneur credible? We have to think about that, the capabilities. But the other aspect is the trust on the level of integrity. What's your intention? What are your motives here? How is this going to affect, what I'm trying to accomplish? And I think finding ways to have a neutral party boost credibility is absolutely vital. And ideally, you have somebody who's a partner, right? A third party who's, an uninterested partner who can be credible and serve as that referee for you. But doing that in the arena where you don't know those people and they're not willing to go out on a limb for you, it's really, how do you get started on that?
So my other hat is I am in the board of the European Innovation Council, which is the largest government investor in Europe. So it's a 10 billion euro program owned by the European Commission. And the question is, why will the European Commission want to be a shareholder in this deep tech startups? And the answer lies in the need of de-risking the technology. So you need to have an investor. And in Europe, we didn't have this kind of investor which would like to go into this quite risky business. 8 out of the 10 startups don't make it. So if I will say, let's go and jump from the plane, and 8 out of the 10 parachute will not open, I don't think many of us will jump out of the plane, right? Except if you will guarantee somehow. And that's what the European Commission find it very interesting, to invest 10 billion tax money to de-risk the deep tech technology, because we know without this de-risking, no scale will be available. So that's one of the ways you can do it. And what we do at the European Commission is we give each startup 2.5 million free money. It's a grant just to do a large-scale test, so you will have a reference to be able to scale that credibility we just mentioned.
Yeah.
Heidi, are there other kind of partnerships alongside or initiatives alongside what you just mentioned in Europe that can be critical in terms of helping these under-the-radar technologies reach scale?
Absolutely. So I was privileged to work with a group called Leaders on Purpose. Right? And it's a sort of think tank area that is looking...
US-based initiative?
It is not, actually. It's a global initiative, mostly UK-based. And we were looking at what it took at the level of CEOs, primarily of public companies, to push forward a purpose-driven agenda and drive that through the organization. And what it allowed us to examine is, at the level of very big companies, how were they co-investing or partnering in joint ventures with some of these on-the-ground technologies. And bringing those stories to life, I think, helped us develop a framework for what does it take for leaders of big public companies, and then you can trickle that down from there, to make the commitment that their organization is interested in this, is pursuing this kind of purpose-driven mission, and then cascade it through their strategy, make sure that the execution really follows through, be able to communicate that in the most compelling way to the full range of stakeholders. And that's a kind of organization that is focused and very intentional about how we are uncovering some of the capability gaps and then trying to scale it from there.
Yeah. So part of what we're talking about today is also narrative power, right? Like, who gets to be seen as an innovator and who doesn't. So let's talk a little bit before we open up for questions about how we can shift the narrative. Heidi, I'll come back to you. How can global institutions, again, universities, multilateral organizations, play a more active role in amplifying that innovation that is not originating in the West?
I'm going to come back to the relevance and the relatability.
Yeah.
I think by helping to craft that narrative in ways that people understand I hate to say it, but the what's in it for me.
We think about that in journalism all the time. How do you rewrite a lead for the Western audience?
That's it. Yeah, and I know that sounds very crass. And I've had the opportunity to live and work on 4 different continents, and so I can sometimes take a quite critical eye to that. But if it's the reality, the question is, how do we use that for good, and how do we get people thinking about these technologies in ways that are very targeted and very specific to the kinds of issues that are on people's minds.
Mm-hmm. And Yusuf, let me flip that question for you. You're an entrepreneur, right? So how do you convince governments or customers that solutions that are coming from outside these tech capitals can actually outperform more conventional offerings, especially and are super beneficial when serving fragile environments? So what does it take to convince them?
It will be very hard to convince them. Let's start there. I think by first explaining what is the innovation journey and what it takes to innovate. So most of the people, when you will talk with an innovator, he will be so much in love with the technology. He will continuously talking about how great this invention is, and you will tell him, who is your customer? And he will tell you, everyone. So then you know he is in love with the technology and not in love with the customer. So first what we need to know is we need to explain the total innovation journey. It starts at the university with the researcher, but it doesn't end there. And a lot of in the back about 10 years ago in Europe, we had the intention to fund this kind of research institute with the idea, if we will fund these deep research institutes, they will be able to create startups. And we need to shift that view. We are not interested anymore in startups. We are interested in scale-ups. But we need to look back from scale-up perspective and looking back all the way to the research institutes. And once we will be able to explain that journey, then the government agencies will be interested. And that's why the EIC 6 years ago existed. Mm-hmm. So in Europe, we had the Horizon program, which was like 100% research-based program. Till the Commissioner Carlos Moedas came with the idea, like, we are in Europe very good at spending money on research, but not good at spending research, on getting money from the research. So, and that's why the EIC came, by focusing on the innovator, understanding the need, and looking back to the research.
Let me open up to the audience for some questions. You can raise your hand, and I'm sure we have a mic that we can pass around. Lady in the first.
Thank you. Great insight that you shared. Really appreciate it. My question is around any new models, whether they're financial policy or infrastructure models that are showing promise in scaling grassroots technologies. And this is key, without stripping the people that the technology intends to serve, without stripping them of local ownership and or relevance. I'm curious, I mean, I've heard you've shared a little bit about your product, but how are you ensuring in your innovation and your development of that product that the people, the clients that it intends to serve, are part of the innovation model?
That's a great question.
If you will not be in love with your customer, you will never succeed. So the answer is simple. You need to focus on their need and design the product and the technology based on that. The question is, who is going to finance the risk of the innovation? That's the most difficult question. So if you will have a rich government, they will have the grants. But how are we going to do it in other countries where there are innovators and there are technology, but there is not a grant-based research? Right. And that's where I think is the biggest win we can have. we can have a system or a bank financing and granting innovators in this first phase of the innovation.
I've seen, just like the example you gave of Europe, I was in Dubai last year. There's a program called Prototypes for Humanity, which is essentially kind of like, bringing university-led kind of innovation from across the world and kind of like creating a sandbox environment there and incubating those back in the countries where those ideas came from. Do you have a thought on this idea?
I actually had a question. So I'm really curious who you see, building on this last question, who do you see on the ground as the most untapped potential advocate?
You said potential advocate.
Advocate, yeah. Right? So you need people on the ground who are really going to take this ownership. But there must be people who could be those advocates who get overlooked.
I think journalism can play a much bigger role by focusing on the unheard stories. So still we are writing way too much about what Elon Musk is tweeting than about an environmental crisis somewhere in the world. And by focusing on this kind of storytelling and that there are solutions. So at this moment in the world, we have enough technologies to solve all that social economical problems. The problem is these technologies, they don't have the finance and they don't have the scale to do it. So that's my take. I think we are still focusing on this, on that cheap kind of media, and we need to go into the deeper and telling the stories where it's really necessary to share this kind of stories.
I'm going to take that back to the newsroom. More questions from the audience? If not, I have a question, which is partly my job here. So let's imagine it is 2030, which is, I used to say 2030 and 2021, it used to feel so far. Now it's 5 years, right? What does success look like if the level playing field, if the playing field for innovation were truly level? What kind of stories would be front and center that aren't today? Who wants to take that first?
Please.
I think the short answer is because they're not front and center, it's hard to know, right? We don't know what we don't know. But if we can imagine, I would think that there are going to be these grassroots kind of applications, maybe not new technologies, but the application and reapplication of existing technologies to solve problems that we hadn't developed them for, right? And I think that that's where a lot of the innovation can come from because it's less expensive than de novo innovation. And it is it potentially gets us past some of the credibility issues because we can demonstrate that it worked in, for this use case. And if we can then reapply and figure out the next use case and the next one, it could help us jumpstart some of these areas. So I'm hopeful that we could get there.
That's a good note to end on. What about you, Yusuf?
I really hope we will hear much more from Africa. So, like the stories about Africa are still much more dominated by the negative stories. And there is so much potential in the people, in the innovation, it's a very rich continent. And it didn't get the potential it deserves yet. So I hope in 2030 we will open the newsletter. We will read these amazing innovators from Africa coming with breakthrough technologies, changing the world in Europe. I hope to hear this kind of stories and to read it.
Right. And on that note, and I'm going to do a short pitch, like we're one of the few publications that very specifically focus outside Western markets. And Africa is one of those places. We have dedicated reporters. So do check out the stories on restofworld.org. So as we heard over the last 30 minutes or so some of the most important innovations, they're built in places that we don't often think about, don't expect, right? And they're being built for futures that we can't afford to ignore. The challenge is not only to recognize them, but to invest in these systems. I think the thing about really making them relatable, making them relevant, but also how do you really kind of like bring on known partners who help solve for some of those unknowns that you talked about. And that is the key to building long-lasting partnerships. And on that note, I want to thank our panelists for their great insight, and thank you everybody for joining us this morning.